Hello Plymouth, Luke Pollard here, I'm your Member of Parliament. The NEU Union has sent me some questions, so I'm going to try my best to answer them in as quick time as I can. Let's begin. Yes, Labour's clear that we need to fund our schools properly. We've seen years on years on years of Tory cuts to education. It's simply not acceptable that in Plymouth, at the end of the new funding formula, we're going to see our kids worth £500 a head less than the national average. We need to get parity of funding for our kids in Plymouth and across the far southwest. We're not getting that at the moment, and I simply don't believe assertions that have been made by local Conservatives that no school will lose out. That's not the story that teachers, head teachers and teaching assistants are telling me when I'm going around schools in the area that I represent. We need to see a proper long-term funding increase for our schools, making sure that money is not only spent on buildings, books, computer equipment, sport, but also on staff. So we make sure that our teachers and teaching assistants, the teaching staff, are adequately paid an inflation adjusted amount, so they're getting not a real terms pay cut as they're getting under the Conservative government. There's a lot to do, but funding our schools fairly is key to Labour's policy here. If I'm honest, I'm not a huge fan of free schools in the academisation programme. We're seeing schools making decisions without any accountability, trusts set up that don't really govern properly, and the accountability that for so long has been connected to local communities via the local councils eroded. I want to see more coordination between schools. In the area that I represent, we've got one of every single school any government since 1945 has ever thought of. Think about it, we've got private schools, grammar schools, state schools, we've got faith schools, free schools, studio schools, and there's more besides. The best way of getting the most out of that education system is, instead of creating a situation where they're all competing against each other for everything, is there's a greater level of collaboration and cooperation between schools. I think local authorities have a really key role in that, and I would like to see the government recognise that, especially after the failure of so many free schools and so many studio schools. The government's arrangements simply aren't there at the moment. Well, I always kind of feel on this one here that it's not my job to pick winners between all these different schools that we've got. I'm not a huge fan of grammar schools, if I'm honest, and Labour's policy's got some concerns about this, as you well know. But we know that we need some more school places, but we know we've got also far too many school places for sixth formers. The way that I think we should do this is by having a coordinated programme. So schools are working together to make sure there's enough places for our kids and make sure those places are in good schools, and that the funding follows for every school, so every school can be a good school. I've got a meeting with the HSB coming up shortly to look into the detail of their proposals. I want to make sure that this doesn't take away funding for other schools in the city. Well, as I said earlier, I'm not a big fan of the free school programme. I think the way that government has effectively set these up as small privatisable units, multi-academy trusts are also part of that story, units of education provision that can be sold off to the private sector, lifting the restriction on making private profit from education. I think we're far too close to that scenario, so we need to be bold about setting this up. Now, some free schools have been fantastic. They've really improved education outcomes for communities, they've created different curriculums, different offerings for environments, but far too many of them are simply replicating school provision that already exists, starving schools of funding and creating additional capacity where there's not needed, where places where we do need more school places are not getting that investment. Now, Plymouth Studio School has had a tough time over many years, but the current set of the head teacher and the staff were turning it around. I'm pretty disappointed in the way that the Trust has run Plymouth Studio School. I think it really shows a real paucity of governance, and that there wasn't enough challenge or involvement. And the fact that we've got to the end of this process with the Trust making a decision to close the school without engaging parents or the students, and with there being no provision for courses not replicated elsewhere for the kids, especially those people in year 10, I think it's simply not good enough. Now, we've got problems in our education setting in Plymouth. We know there's challenges at other schools. Our grades are far too low in far too many schools. We've got problems at the UTC. That's why we need to work together to make sure we're getting the right investment environment, making sure the money's going into where it's needed, that we're retaining and recruiting really good talent, and that we're focusing everything on making sure that our kids are getting the best education. At the moment, with the government's free school academisation programmes, I'm not sure that's what they're trying to do. There's lots of nice words, but when it comes to the reality, kids' education is suffering when these experiments fail, and that's simply not good enough. Well, things have changed hugely since I was at school. You know, as an out MP, this is an area that I feel really strongly about. We've got some fantastic LGBT plus groups in Plymouth. The Not Alone group for trans and non-binary groups is fantastic. The LGBT youth club, youth group is brilliant. But we need to make sure that this is not only changes enacted by legislation and by rules from the centre, it's a lived experience in every single person's environment. Now, there's far too many young LGBT kids who are still facing bullying in schools, far too many young LGBT children who are thinking about committing suicide because they feel that there is no other option for them. And I think as a society, we have to change that. We have to say that every child, no matter who you fall in love with, no matter what your sexuality or gender identity is, has a place in our society, is welcome, and should get the support and encouragement that they need to be their very best self, whatever that may be. There's an awful lot we need to do, but key to that is providing good LGBT role models to make sure that young people know that being gay, bisexual, transgender, lesbian, gender fluid, non-binary, trans, whatever it may be, is fine as long as they're okay with it. And that's where we've got a huge amount of work to do. As an out MP, I'm going to keep pushing that. But as teachers and teaching staff, you've got such a key role in making sure that all our kids in every single class in Plymouth can feel themselves and be positive and know that the decisions that they're making about who they are, when they come out, how they live their lives, is good. And we should encourage it. I get really annoyed about our funding for the Far South West. We get below average on nearly every single level of government spend, and it's simply not good enough. There's two reasons, principally, why we've been getting such a poor level of funding. The first one is that we keep sending people to Westminster that vote for cuts. We've got to stop doing this as a region. The second reason, and this is a harder one, is that we as a city, we as a region, accept a poor deal far too often. We need to be louder and prouder about how good we are as a city, how good we are as a region. That's really saying our best bits. We don't do that all too often. We hide our light under a bushel and hide the bushel. If we're better at that, it means we can be better, clearer and more relentless about going after the areas where we need a bit of help. Funding for schools is certainly one of those areas. It's simply unacceptable that our kids are worth £500 less per head than the national average. It's unacceptable that when we compare Plymouth to other cities our same size, that we get less money. Now that is money that should be spent on staff, facilities and opportunities for our young people. That's the opportunities denied to those young people in Plymouth because we're not getting that fairer funding that we really need. Now the government can use whatever nice, warm, flowy words it likes about it. Until our kids are funded properly, I'm going to keep campaigning on this, and I invite you to keep up your voice as well, because when we work together, cross-party, unions, politicians, communities, parents, students, all working together, we've got a louder voice, and we need a louder voice because the government has proven time and time again that they're all too happy ignoring us in the West Country. I think the new Labour Council is going to change a lot of things. One thing that will change, certainly from the last 2 years, is just how the council can work with trade unions. Now, I'm very proud to be a trade union member. I'm proud to be a trade union-backed candidate, now a trade union-backed MP. I know that Labour councillors on Plymouth City Council feel the same as well. We need to work together. There's some really tough decisions coming up. The government cuts are continuing, which means some really harsh decisions have to be made about where the money needs to go. But we need to keep our focus on the kids' educations, on retaining and giving great opportunities to our staff, to making sure that we're providing the type of education that I know you all want to provide, that the resources and the focus is not always allowing us to do. So keep up that work. I'm going to keep campaigning for you in Westminster. I know that Plymouth City Council is right behind you as well. Thanks very much. I hope this answers all your questions. If you want to ask me something else, I do a Facebook Live every Wednesday evening at 7:30 on my Facebook page, facebook.com/Luke Pollard, and I hope to see many of you soon. Thanks very much. See you soon.